now. How that happened.
I rejiggered my clock. I figured he says my timer. Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. It's Monday. After a exhausting weekend of college football, I can only say the following. I'm glad I'm not Deion Sanders. I tuned into the Oregon-Colorado game, and I guess I wanted the Cinderella story to come true. I wanted Colorado to continue to thrive. And, as much as you kind of root against the guy with swagger, you kind of admire the person who's got it. And deserves it, and can be cocky because he can talk the talk and walk the walk. And Deion certainly was a great athlete and is and remains a great coach. And I wanted to see whether that magic would help him take on the Ducks, but it didn't. I mean, what was his final score in that game?
It was 42-6 was the final on that.
So, being the petty human being I am, I recall the story about Deion. They don't want to see a black man being this proud. They don't want to see a black this, a black that, black this. And I get so tired of the rhetoric of race. As I watched the score come in, I kept thinking of the tune Shaft. You'll remember that song. And I'm thinking Shaft got slapped, got itch slapped on Saturday, and he had it coming. And I guess I didn't mind. Because, somewhere behind the color line, there remains a universe of human beings who are bound together by their characters rather than their accidents of birth. And so Deion took it well. He said there were no excuses after the butt kicking. He continues to swagger, and he'll swagger his way into another huge contest on Saturday where they're going to be playing University of Southern California. I think currently ranked 5th in the UP polls, or AP polls rather. So whether he can survive this is an open question.
Yeah, and this is going to be another one of those huge primetime games, right? So this weekend, Colorado was ranked number 19 in the Associated Press top 25 rankings, and Oregon came in at number 10. The divide there was very obvious. I was with some people over the weekend, and we all kind of crowded around the big screen at 3:30. I think kickoff was actually at 3:45 because the game prior was running a little long. And from the moment that game got started, it was two different classes of teams on that field. It was very obvious, and anyone who's played sports at any level can recognize exactly when that phenomenon is occurring very early. So I have no doubts that Deion will, take this as a humbling experience and at least use this as a basis to raise the expectations of those young athletes coming in. I think that it's difficult to maintain confidence and self-esteem in the face of such an obvious failure, right? But I think this is the type of coach that they need, a coach like Deion who can be the lightning rod for that criticism, right? But can also turn around and inspire his guys to say, look, we had a hot start, but we didn't play anybody until we played Eugene, right? That team out of Eugene, Oregon. So
Matt Kyle's baiting us. Be careful now. If you say Colorado sucks, they'll turn it into a race war. Maybe they will. And, and maybe that's one of the reasons I was happy to see, Deion get slapped around a little bit, because I'm still smarting from opening night of the NFL football this year playing the Black National Anthem. And, normally if it was a product I cared less about, I would stop using it. I would stop watching it. I would not purchase it. I would encourage others to boycott it. But candidly, I am such a football junkie. I'm back at it. And it got me thinking about the following: the difference between consent, acquiescence, and resignation as phenomena explaining a political society. Our political institutions are steeped in a notion of consent, that somehow we're a democratic republic and that we live by dint of laws that we consent to be governed in this way. Of course, that's a fiction. Unless you've sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution as a professional matter, as lawyers have, or as judges or public officials have, you didn't consent to the institutions around you. You acquiesce in them because that's how you get by. You decide, I'll use dollars rather than tokens when I go to the grocery store because the clerk will accept a dollar but not the token. And you don't really care one way or the other. You just want the transaction to occur. Then there's resignation. And that's where I am with with the NFL. If they're going to go down this PC rabbit hole and create division by giving everybody their own national anthem, or at least by playing the black national anthem, of course I don't consent. I don't acquiesce, but I continue to view the games and I continue to love the sport. And maybe somebody will say that's acquiescence. From my perspective, it's mere resignation, and having to accept things that I find to be distasteful. And I'm not sure that's good. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's a good thing for the Republic. Luttrell is baiting me. Luttrell, Norm's first fantasy football team enhanced his football engagement yet. It helps when a fantasy football team wins. Luttrell, I don't know if you looked at the stats page last night, but you might notice the one team that had, pay attention, Mike, more points than anyone else going into Monday night. That would have been my team. But I don't really want to make this about my team.
Are you sure about that? Are you sure?
I'm not sure enough to get off the screen right now, but I think I had 120.
I'll real-time update us here because I'm still wildly impressed with Dawn McNeil's team. I'm actually scared of her now, even though I've already beat her once. I'm still I just don't want to see her again. So 129 for you, and then she was at 123. Yeah, so you're correct. You're correct. You're going into tonight with 2 games left on the docket, and leading the points charge. But I think I have mine well in hand. So I'll go to 3-0. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, I think there'll be 3-3-0 teams left at the end of the weekend. You, me, and Victoria's Secrets for Jackie Palvereri, who I face next week. So I probably won't be available on Monday. I'll probably be licking my wounds after she dispenses with me. But such is life. But anyhow, enough of this football talk. The other thing I noticed this week, though, Mike, on college football was just how graceless some of the coaches were. After Ohio State pulled off a last-second victory at Notre Dame, there was Ryan Day with a chip on his shoulder the size of the Buckeye State, bitching about Lou Holtz. Where's Lou Holtz now? Because Holtz had some tart things to say about the toughness of the Ohio State team. And Dan Lanning's attack on the media, and his swiping at Dion, that also struck me as a little bit tasteless. And so it was a good weekend for college sports. Not so much for college football coaches. Looking forward.
And we're gonna get there was a lot of fanfare around Colorado, obviously, for their early success. Yeah, Dawn's gonna look. Dawn's the front runner right now. I will. If we were doing power rankings, it would be Dawn, and then we'd figure out who else from there. But I think she had. I don't know if she had one of those running backs that put up something like 45 points. The Miami Dolphins beat the Denver Broncos 70-20.
Yeah, what's up with that?
So anyway, I think Dawn said, talk to kind of like the Bears and the Chiefs. No, I mean, the Bears are the worst team in the league. The Broncos might be damn near close, but the Chiefs did not do to the Bears what the Dolphins did to the Broncos. But with Dion, they play the ostensible Heisman Trophy winner, first round. The 101 pick whenever he decides to go to the league, and USC's quarterback. I think his name is Caleb Williams. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think that I'm using the right name there. And we are going to see on the field yet again, what media hype can do, because I think it was the Oregon coach that was on giving his pregame speech. Did you see that, Norm?
Yeah, they're in it for clicks. We're in it to win. Win.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in it for wins, right? Yeah, they're in it for clicks. We're in it for wins. That is where this Colorado football program is right now. But I think that we should be leveling expectations here, because the Colorado football team was 1-11 last year.
Yeah.
Before Dion came in. It takes time to build a legitimate program. Most of these guys coming in are coming from sort of those junior college, a lot of the Jackson State guys came over. There's a reason that they were not at the Division I tier where they were playing. They are smaller, they are slower, and they are not as gifted. They're going to have to earn every bit of it. And this is not me sliding it, but I mean, these guys that are going to the likes of, the Oregon Ducks, I think there was some stat when I was in high school, because everybody was infatuated with the way that Nike had sort of involved itself with Oregon and the uniform developments and innovations that they were doing. They had over 100 uniform combinations because of their sort of affiliation with Nike. The founder was from graduated from Oregon. Anyway, these programs like Alabama, like Oregon, like Texas, whatever, I mean, they can shift up and down year to year. And you know this, Michigan as well. But the overall average of the athlete on the field in the starting lineup, whether it's offense or defense, special teams, whatever, it's not to be played with. It's not something that, and it's almost, again, like maybe we can use this as an opportunity to say to the media, why are you what are you doing giving expectations? Because the Colorado team was set up to fail a little bit, right?
Mm.
This was bound to happen sooner than later. And this was, I mean, I'm glad that it happened earlier in the season than later in the season. I'm glad that we didn't go all season with Colorado not really playing anybody legitimate and then coming up on the college football playoff season and getting trounced in that, right? Because that would serve to undermine the legitimacy of that playoff football system. So this is a good thing. Overall, this is a good thing. I'm not worried about Deion. Deion is Deion. His sons are of his stock, right? They will be okay. They will get this program right. But let's not fool ourselves about what we're dealing with on a national stage. Anyway.
All right. Well, it's just fun. It's fun stuff to watch and fun. I just had to get that little bit about Shaft getting itch slapped because and then the poor sportsmanship among coaches. Hey, did Mike? You passed on an interesting Real Clear Politics poll to me today, and I was fascinated by it. What do you think? What's the greatest? I mean, I'll just ask you, what's the greatest threat to American politics, in international politics? What nation poses the greatest threat?
Which nation? It's most certainly China.
Well, according to Real Clear Politics, 53% of Americans believe that, 29% believe it's Russia, 4% believe it's North Korea. You fall on an odd part of the age sign. Usually it's older Americans who view China as a greater threat. Younger Americans tend to see Russia as a greater threat.
I wonder why that is.
Well, is Russia a threat at all? I mean, when it comes to the question of whether Ukraine should be permitted to enter NATO, a surprising number of Americans are in support of that. And let me see if I can find the numbers here. 54% of Americans favor adding the Ukraine to NATO. 68% favor adding Sweden. 77% of Americans view NATO as essential to our national security. I find that to be sort of odd because the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance was created in the wake of the Second World War to provide a strategic alliance against the Eastern Bloc, against the Soviet bloc, and there is no Soviet bloc any longer. And so one would have thought that when the Soviet Union disintegrated, NATO might as well. There are some who say that a suspicion of American engagement in foreign affairs is a sign of populism or of some sort of conservative impulse. I don't know about that. I just don't know that anybody has yet made the case that America's national security is bound intimately with endless support of Ukraine. I mean, we've put $75 billion into their struggle with Russia thus far. There are times when international tensions raise high enough that people worry about a nuclear confrontation with Russia over Ukraine. And candidly, nobody has yet made a persuasive case to me that our interests are involved there at all. I mean, consider the contrast with China and Taiwan. What would happen if China invaded Taiwan? According to the Real Clear Politics poll, 39% of Americans would favor military action in response to China taking control of Taiwan. 35% said no. So it's a paradox to me, Mike, that while more Americans view China as a potential threat to American interest, yet we're evenly divided about how to respond in the event that China seeks to reacquire Taiwan, whereas we're far more ready to leap into the fray in Western Europe over the Ukraine.
Well, and that's what. So I asked the question. Why do you think it is that young people see that more than people of a certain age older? And I would just ask in response, which nation receives that type of criticism digitally in a ubiquitous fashion, right? And then which demographic is using technology and social media more? There is a clear link to me between those that are not online, surreally online, in the way that younger generations most certainly are, and a perspective on the world that matches what they are being met with in these online channels. So the overall threat to America, to me, continues to be this aloofness when it comes to the consequences of that opaque black box algorithm on future generations and their concept of self and the awareness of real geopolitical threats.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because Yuval Harari, I think is his last name, was in the news again this weekend. He's he's written a number of books, big history books, and he's very much behind the World Economic Forum and very much supports this notion of globalism and the notion that somehow we're one world that can be bound together digitally and managed and directed by a global elite. And that, there's a fascinating book. We talked about it about 2 years ago, Mike. I think we did. It's called The Collapse of Western Civilization. It's a short book. Naomi Klein may have written it. I can't recall. But I picked it up because of the title and because it was brief. And the claim was that this was a history written, a fictive history written in like the year 2300 or 2400. And what caused the West to collapse and who survived? And it was climate change. Maybe it was Naomi Oreskes then. But in any case, it was climate change. And the only country that survived was China. And China was the only one that survived because it lacked the sense of individual rights and had the ability and will to impose a top-down solution on its people. And because global warming required a collective response, or climate change required a collective response, China was able to respond, and the West was tied down in debates about individualism. And the result was that the West collapsed as a result of Anthropocene changes. In other words, the human-directed climate change, and China survived. And so I think that's what I hear you saying, that right now, in terms of setting the stage for global perceptions, technology governs. China has the most advanced technocratic foreign policy and information-driven regime around, and in an odd sort of way, it reflects, at least in my view, the same vision of human flourishing that the World Economic Forum does. There are collective answers, and those collective answers, there are better collective answers than not. And an entity with power can discern those better answers and impose its will on others by shaping the contours of the debate, by setting the table for what you can choose to consume intellectually. And I think, Mike, what you're saying is that this is reflected maybe in American public opinion surveys, where younger people are more inclined to view Russia as a threat because China is directing them that way. And I
don't know who. I want to be clear. I don't know who is directing them that way. I just know that they are being directed that way. We are all being directed that way. And among our social elites in this country, if one does not pledge absolute resolve for the cause of Ukraine, whatever that is, right? It has not been clearly communicated. But if one does not pledge absolute resolve for the cause of Ukraine, that is tantamount to being what? A Putin sympathizer, a terrorist, a domestic terrorist, right? All of these other things. And so why would young people be led to have an opinion that they know uniquely, almost innately at this point, will have real consequences for their future prospects in their own personal lives, their social groups and in groups, their status among their peers at their academic institutions? These things, they are led into a place where it is not encouraged to take those types of risks or to indulge in critical thinking, or certainly if one does, not to reveal the consequences thereof if they are contrary to established opinion. That's just the reality. When I was growing up, the version of this was, keep your Facebook private. Don't put any photos on there. Don't say anything that you don't want employers to see, right? Because it was just a hiring thing, but it didn't have anything to do with your political opinions. It was, your behavior offline, right? Or your behavior offline that made its way online that gave you some sort of reputational risk, or you made you look like a reputational hazard to the company, right? It's completely evolved. Now it's much more synthetic, right? You have to be perfect all the time. And perfect is hive mind now, Norm. And so here's something weird. I sent you, so I put this tweet on the screen, and this is the link. And when I was going to share this link, that is what brought up that defense survey from July of this year that I think you were referring to. But what I've got on the screen now is actually what that link goes to. This is why I was talking about censorship being a partisan issue.
Well, put that other screen up because it is interesting. I mean, the headline is is censorship a partisan issue? If you read the article, it doesn't really reflect anything about that. That got edited out. But on the tweet that you had up moments ago, what did it show? That more Democrats.
So 47% of Democrats say free speech should be legal, quote, only under certain circumstances. 34% of Democrats say Americans have too much freedom. 75% of Democrats say government has a responsibility to censor, quote, hateful social media posts, which this goes to your hate speech exception prediction with the Supreme Court in the First Amendment. And then the last one says only 31% strongly agree with the statement, quote, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend your death, the right to say it. And I think that is maybe attributed to Voltaire. I'm not sure if that was actually a Voltaire quote, but I think it's branded as such.
Well, and so, that reflects what we were talking about moments ago about global consensus, the World Economic Forum, and so forth, and what I call the politics of virtue and the dangers of the politics of virtue as reflected in the public health state. If you have a regime that thinks it knows what's good for you, and then it can force you to be free, to use that expression of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's. If it has a vision of you that is better than the vision you have for yourself, it can demonize your own vision of yourself and impose a vision of you from above. The poll, I see you've got that in there. I must have missed it. The poll also asked another question. Let me ask you this, Mike. What's a greater threat to the United States? Foreign terrorism or domestic white supremacists?
It's just a laughable question.
Of course it is.
That's my answer. That's such a laughable question.
Listen to the answers in the result. 48% of those polled say it's foreign terrorism, but 4 in 10 Americans, almost 37%, believe it's domestic white supremacist. I don't even know what a domestic white supremacist is. Are you a domestic white supremacist if you raise questions about unlawful immigration into the United States? Yes. Are you a domestic white supremacist if you don't buy the DEI mantra? Yes. Are you a domestic white supremacist if you think reparations are divisive and should never be given in the United States on account of race? Yes. And so, suddenly a significant part of the population is demonized and declared to be personae non grata because of what they are, what they believe. And that falls into line with this censorship discussion. Is it hate speech to say that Deion Sanders, that Shaft got itch slapped? It might be in some people's minds, because why would I equate him with this powerful black figure? It could be that because Sanders himself proclaimed that's what he was. But Sanders predicted that that the white world would want to see him fall because we can't stand powerful black figures. I mean, I don't know. All this race pandering has got to end at some point. But the notion that somehow we're becoming familiar, becoming comfortable with censorship, that people are calling for the government to enact standards of speech that others must adhere to, that is a fundamental shift in American political attitudes.
Well, and what I've got on the screen here, it sounds like something I've said on this stream multiple times before, but quote, some of what is dividing these differences is generational, as millennials and Gen Z have come of age in a digital age environment in which reasonable expectations of privacy seem a relic of the past. Quote, those under 30 are most open to censorship by the government, Kimball noted, adding that 42% of this cohort deem it more important to them that the government protect national security than guard the right to free expression. Among those over 65 years old, the corresponding percentage was 26%.
But here's the hypocrisy in it. I mean, abortion politics are transforming American politics, and they're rooted in a reasonable expectation of privacy, rather. And so my sense is the same millennials and Gen Zers who regard a reasonable expectation of privacy when it comes to expressive speech insist on it when it comes to bodily choice. It's the same body of law and it's the same set of principles. So I'm not so sure that they don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy. I think what they want to insist on is that their definition of what's reasonable is the one that governs. And thus the culture wars become a clash between what Isaiah Berlin once called monism and pluralism. In his classic essay, The Hedgehog and the Fox, he said, you know, the hedgehog knows, the fox knows many things, the hedgehog knows one, and one great truth. And so a monist is a person who, like Plato in the Republic, thinks he has a vision of the good, and because he or she knows what the good is, he should be the philosopher king, and a better society would be governed in accordance with the good. The fox knows many truths, knows many things, and is a pluralist and doesn't think that there's one answer or a one-size-fits-all response to anything, and is more pragmatic. And American politics has to date been largely pragmatic when it comes to speech. Obviously, at various points in our history, we've been intolerant of dissent, the Red Scare, the labor strikes in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, all the problems with the Weather Underground and whatnot, and dissent in the 60s and 70s. And I would say that there's a new monistic totalitarian impulse afoot in the country now, and it reflects what we saw arise after the pandemic. The politics of virtue, a public health state, an elite that knows and will work with the World Economic Forum and global institutions to produce a vision of a better world. Dawn has a great comment. Being a citizen of the world felt good to me when I was 20. Now, yikes. This notion of being a citizen of the world sounds good. It's a sentimental tripe that has a nice feel to it. Because after all, we're all in this together. And if we're all in it together, then shouldn't we all compromise for the sake of the collective good? The problem with that analysis is it begs the question of who decides what's the collective good, and what are we going to do with people that disagree with us? Will we compel them to be free? Will we send them to re-education camps? Right now, we're tiptoeing in that direction because what we do is we cancel those we disagree with.
No, that's not necessarily true. We cancel those we disagree with who have the temerity and the stones to say out loud to other people to explain why they disagree.
Okay.
Right. And I don't mean to say that what you said is wrong at all. You're absolutely right. But what we're watching with the likes of Dave Portnoy, who I think I sent you that. Did you get a chance to listen to that phone call between him and the Washington Post reporter?
No, I did.
Do yourself the favor. Maybe we'll analyze that tomorrow, Wednesday. But it's about a 5-minute phone call. Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports fame. We've talked about him before. We talk about Russell Brand. We talk about Elon Musk. Right. The only issue that these people encounter isn't that they think for themselves. It's that they have a microphone and they decide to explain to other people why they think what they think. And to the extent that what they think goes against the dominant narrative, that's when all of a sudden they encounter quite a lot of resistance in their personal and business lives. Coincidentally, of course, it's not a, no sort of organized force on that end. But that's ultimately what I think is going to plague younger millennials and Gen Z, is that they are going to, if they are not careful, they are going to lead us to this sort of event horizon where they will be responsible for ensuring that none of us, including them, are allowed to ever change their minds, that our character arcs as individuals should be just like a monolith, right? That we should never evolve and adapt to new information, or that we shouldn't use our experiences and our learnings and our own collective history to evolve our understanding of current times. that innovation requires taking risks and these sorts of things that led America to, ironically, the point where young people could be so frivolous and unappreciative of the gifts that we've been given by the sacrifices of those that came before us, right? That's the irony of this to me.
Well, and so we'll end today on just a little malicious note of mine, where I just poke once again at Merrick Garland, who is becoming the nation's whiner in chief. We talked a little bit about him last week in front of a House Oversight Committee, talking about how they'll never back down and they're just doing their job. The New York Times over the weekend had a piece: as Trump prosecutions move forward, threats and concerns increase. There's a number of things that Merrick Garland could draw lessons he could learn from any blowback he's getting as a result of the decisions he's making. If he takes the politics of virtue road, it will be that those who criticize him and push back are threats to national security, threats to his security, and should be prosecuted. That would be the monistic response. I know best what to do, and when you criticize me, you need to be brought into line. A pragmatist might say, wait a minute, maybe I'm out over my skis. Maybe I'm prosecuting cases that shouldn't be prosecuted, and maybe a number of Americans are offended because I've overstepped a boundary that the people expect me to respect. And Merrick is not open to that. So I am not sympathetic to he, or frankly to the Justice Department and those who believe that they're being targeted for harassment. We don't have, we the people, the power to indict members of the Justice Department. You do. And if many Americans are growing restive and disgusted and perhaps even rebellious with the decisions you've made, maybe it's time for a look in the mirror rather than a look to the prisons to solve this problem. Because you can indict half the nation, but you can't imprison them all. And if the prison you're living in is the one that you've created because of the decisions you and your principal policymakers have made, don't expect sympathy from me. You made your bed, now lie in it.
There's a lot that, and I meant to send you the Tim Pool episode from over the weekend, Norm, and I'm forgetting the couple of guys, their names that were on there. They're former federal agents of various persuasions and experience levels, but they discussed this issue of domestic white terrorism, right? And they talked about it in relationship to the Patriot Act and how the Patriot Act was used. There were two main phases, and I'm going to go back and listen to this again because it was really enlightening for me personally to understand the evolution from using certain surveillance strategies and tactics in the first wave of the, Iraq War, Afghanistan, looking at various people from various parts of the world and their goings on financially, their digital communications, that kind of stuff to keep tabs. But then when the threat had sort of been subdued at that first primary level, there was already a mandate within these federal investigative agencies, the National Security Agency, the FBI, et cetera, and they were being funded through defense budgets to continue doing this stuff. And the natural evolution was to turn that apparatus inward. That is, now we are in sort of a third wave of that, because now that they have exhausted whatever sort of intrigue that they may have had with a certain demographic of people, we're seeing that, in fact, that now they have to find someone else to point that scrutiny at, or lose the funding. Because
to be domestic white supremacists, people who say not so fast to give the country away. We're not demons because of how we were born. I don't know.
It's just interesting that we have that poll that's saying, oh, what's the greater threat? And it's like, well, Merrick Garland and his ilk are responsible in large part for the demonization of people doing their own thing in a lawful way, the school board stuff especially. But then look at the prosecutions in connection with January 6, 2021, in contrast to the riots all over the country and the massive damage. And so again, you've talked about that ad nauseum. I know that, but that's the irony of looking at a poll. It's like, it's working, right? Is that people on average, 1 in 3 thereabout would say that domestic white extremism is the greatest threat, to our country.
Well, let's keep talking more about it. If you see something, say something. This is our snapshot on the world as we see it today. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 8. Thank you for tuning in today, and remember, root for root for the objectors in the Law and Legitimacy fantasy football league, or don't root at all.
Nice. All right. See you tomorrow, Norm. 8 a.m. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll catch you tomorrow.